Hello, and welcome to another week of the Storied Arcs Death Month. I am your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today we are discussing I Killed Giants by Joe Kelly and Ken Niimura.
Yep. J.M. Ken Niimura. I mean, he's credited differently dependingly, but I think his full name is J.M. Ken Niimura. But yeah.
I'm very happy. I have this slightly older trade that doesn't have the movie poster on it, which I'm like, I didn't even know there was a movie adaptation.
Yeah.
And you were with me when I bought this one. You can probably see the little black Sharpie on the bottom, which we got it at a Comic-Con from Gem City Books, which is a place in Dayton, Ohio.
Wholesale used books, things like
Love
that.
them.
Slightly damaged stuff.
They bring all their slightly damaged stuff to comic expos, and it's where I feel like I get my money back from like price of admission, what I spend on signatures.
So the trade that you just held up that obviously listeners can't see it. That's the same one I have as well, and I think I mentioned this during the Zero episode. This is a 7-issue series. You can probably find the issues. I don't know how well it's sold. Issue 1, because it's an issue 1, is harder to find, and the movie obviously brings speculation and things like that. But this is a trade that's got a ton of printings. Like, it had the original printing, which is out of print now. There are there was a 5th anniversary printing, a 15th anniversary printing. You're right. There's the movie tie-in printing. So this is a book that's available, but at this point, it is pretty much just available as a trade. You're going to find it in a collection, because it's been, the series started in July 2008. So again, it's been a while. So you can find the single issues. Again, if you hunt them down, always forward. It's something that we always support. But there are multiple versions and multiple printings of this book that's out there in trade, and you're going to be able to find it. Whether it's a bookstore, used bookstore, comic shop, it's out there.
Hilariously, the 5th anniversary edition, which is what I have, was printed for 4 years.
Yes.
You might have a 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, or 9th edition or anniversary edition, but they're all branded as the 5th. And then the 15th only went to one printing, but it's like, how many did they need? There's also the hardcover limited edition, Titan edition, I think is what they call it.
Right. Yeah. So
the main thing is, like, I think you have to have this one physically, because I was thinking about, like, I think I have it on Comixology or something, but on a tablet screen, it just wouldn't hit right.
Well, we should mention, it was printed in single issue, which is our, regular Western comic size issue, but printed in trade, it's a different size. It's a little shorter, it's a little wider than your typical trade paperback. So if it's on a shelf, on a bookshelf with everything else, like, it's not going to fit in. So it's a little shorter, it's a little wider. So you get a different perspective on the page,
Right.
So yeah, though there is something about having this in physical form in trade. You get kind of what I'm assuming is more of the initial intent of the kind of paper that the story was meant for, the type of size. So you get the perspective that both Kelly and Niimura wanted initially, So yeah, I think also what it says is, with all these printings, it shows how popular the book is. Again, I don't know what the sales were when it came out initially, but in trade, this is a book that Image seemingly wants to have out there. There's no reason to put out multiple printings of your 5th anniversary. There's no reason to then come back out with a 15th anniversary if this wasn't a book that they felt it was worth putting out there, because people wanted to buy it. They still wanted to have it. They still wanted to read it. People were still connecting with it. And I think we'll get into the story, but I mean that there is a universality to this story.
I mean, there's like whatever your entry point is, I think there's a touchstone for everyone here.
Yeah.
Even if you weren't one of the kids in here, like, you could see them. Like,
oh yeah.
Well, they're in every school.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about it real quick here. I mean, so yeah, maybe it's not the specifics of Barbara's circumstance, right? But she is kind of a loner, a little bit of a nerdy girl. Maybe you didn't have a a parent dealing with a sickness or passing when you're very young. Yeah, maybe you were just a kid that was bullied. Maybe you're Sophie. Maybe you're the new kid in town trying to make friends.
Well, I
Maybe
mean,
you're
I'm
maybe you
thinking maybe you're
were
even just
Karen.
one of the unnamed background characters here who just sits in class and is like, why is that girl so weird?
Yeah,
And you get a little empathy for her as the story progresses because you're like, oh, she's trying to deal with something and just does not have the tools to deal with it.
yeah. You're right. Maybe it's the idea of you don't know what someone's dealing with. You don't know what's going on with their life. You don't know what burdens they have put upon them or they put upon themselves, whatever it is. So you're right. There are so many entry points into this story. And again, I think it speaks to the ongoing popularity of this book as to why Image wants to keep it in print, why it's still out there, why they can keep putting out new printings.
And a modestly successful, movie adaptation, which I didn't know about.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to watch it. It's a Netflix movie. There are some pretty good big names or notable names for maybe some of the older characters. Zoe Saldana's in it. Imogen Poots is in it. So there are names people will recognize. I did not get a chance to watch it. But the fact that so many years after the book is out, that someone felt the need to make this happen. It wasn't like it was
the fact that they were
right
like, but the fact that they were, I think the movie was 2018, and that
So
was
10
when they
years.
were on their, they had just finished
Probably
the year 9
fifth-
printings
I'd say
of the second of the
the fifth
5-year
printing,
anniversary.
the fifth printing of the fifth anniversary.
Right. It was
Yeah.
hey, this might have a following.
Yeah.
And I
again-
think it's one of those that like it would probably make a great read for like a middle school English teacher to take kids through.
And that is something I actually have in my notes of not so much who was this aimed at, because I think this is a very universal story. But the question more was, what do you think the experience is like if you read this in middle school, then if you read it in high school, then you read it in college, then you read it as an adult, and then maybe when you read it as a parent? This is a kind of book that you can grow with because you will see and identify with different people. Like if you read this, maybe not at Barbara's age. I think she's supposed to be like 10 or 11. She's in like 4th or 5th grade or something like that. If you read it as a child, maybe in middle school, high school, even college, maybe you're probably not going to identify much with the Karen character, the older sister, the one who's basically become the caretaker. There's probably not a lot of empathy for that character. You see her the way that Barbara sees her. But as you get older, I'm sure you then look back and you think like, she's an adult technically, but she's still like, she's not ready for this. Look what she has to deal with. Look what she's having to juggle. And you start feeling for that character now in a way that probably you wouldn't have when you were younger. You know what I'm saying? So it's the kind of book that, if it's taught, if it's shown to someone at a younger age, that maybe help them connect and find their way in, they pick it up 5 years later in their life, they're going to have a different point. I'm almost certain of it. And then 5 years after that, a different entry point. They're going to hit all those points that we talked about in terms of how to get in the story. And it's just from them reading it over and over again, because it's a book you can return to.
Right. Well, and if you get to the point where you're, I don't know, 18 years old and you still don't know anyone who's died yet,
Yeah.
it's probably one of those books that will resurface for you the first time you're going through the death of someone close to you.
Yeah.
Whether it's friend or family.
I would say it doesn't have to be a parent, doesn't have to be family. Yeah. And when you experience that loss at a young age or a younger-ish age, it's profound. It stays with you. And I can't even imagine what that is like if it's specifically a parent.
Well, I mean, and as brutal as this is for Barbara, she actually has a pretty decent support network. Like there are people proactively checking, and many people don't even have that. They don't even have the guidance counselor at school. They don't even have, the older sister who can like at least keep food on the table, not the best caregiver, but like doing her best. And clearly gives a crap.
Yeah, making them lunches, making them food, getting them off to school, doing all that, and then going and having to earn a living and a wage and do all that and take care, run the house, take care of all that, like the burden there. You're right. She has this support system. I think part of obviously Barbara's journey is understanding the need for all that and recognizing that and not feeling like this is a thing she has to do on her own. And I have to imagine that is such a a universal feeling for a child going through this idea that you're not able to perceive anything outside of yourself, because you're still a child, and I'm not saying, I'm not knocking kids for being kind of egotistical in that way or maybe self-centered in that way. Kids are like that, but her being able to open up and seeing that there are all these people here that want to help, and her being open to understanding that it's okay to have that. It's okay to ask for that. It's okay
Yeah.
to need that.
Right. So, I mean, how long ago was the first time you read this?
Oh, gee, I
Not
probably
single
read.
issue?
No, 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 no. I didn't read this until maybe. I mean, probably even. You know what? Probably. So you said the movie was 2018, right?
Yeah.
Is that what we said? It probably came on my radar. Someone, maybe my brother, mentioned like, "Hey, have you read this?" And probably it probably came up because the movie was announced or came out on Netflix, and I don't know if he saw it or not, but maybe he just saw it and it sparked because he had read it. Maybe it sparked something in his mind, and so it would have been after that. It would have been probably 2019. It could have been a COVID read in 2020 for me when I finally got around to it. So it is a relatively recent read for me. It wouldn't have been on my radar when it first came out in 08, 09.
So
And
what aspect? So let's call it
yeah,
2020. Let's say it was a COVID
yeah,
read.
yeah.
What aspect of it did you latch on to?
Um,
I mean, and obviously there's the normal comic things of like the art is stunning,
yeah,
like
yeah,
the storytelling, yada yada. But
yeah. Well, and
like,
we'll
was
talk
there a
about more.
particular character angle or thematic angle that
I
really hit
think
you?
I think the thematic one of I think really kind of just what I said there, the idea of opening yourself up to the people around you and understanding that not only asking for help, but recognizing that you need help isn't a sign of weakness. And I think Barbara sees that. Her whole thing is, I kill giants. I do this. She spends her time alone in her, not even her room, in like because she doesn't want to go upstairs, in her like auxiliary room, where she's like under covers, under tables. She feels like it's all on her. And just the idea of seeing what the people around her are doing for her and her being open to that. I think that part connected me because the specific of, again, dealing with a sick parent and as a young child and things like that, that isn't my experience there. But the idea of dealing and facing with death of someone close to you at a younger age does hit for me, but I didn't read this story in that way. I think because it was so specifically apparent, it was hard for me to attach to the parent aspect of it because I've read other fiction, other stories that deal with like the death of a close friend. It's something that I have dealt with. So I see that part. So for me, the idea of Barbara isolating herself because she feels like this is what she has to do to survive, to deal with all this, and her journey being no, like life is about experience. It's about living. The fight is in the living, and it's about accepting the people around you. So that Barbara's journey in that way is what I latched onto the first time I read it. What about you?
Well, it's probably it's one of those things where it's probably not exactly what the authors intended. But first time reading this through was before I had a kid, and I I remember the bullying in like elementary school, middle school, high school, and through different periods, I was on both sides of that. Like I was like, moved to a new school, got bullied for a little while, figured out the only way that I could survive bullying was to become a bully myself and just bully someone else and just keep the chain going, which is terrible. And I'm ashamed of it to this day. but like the depiction of bullying is so painfully real in this book, where it's just like, why would this bully need to keep coming back? We'll get to it when we get to the story, but she has this really tough philosophy, which is like, if you stand up to them and you push them around, if you push back, they'll go away, just like giants.
Yeah.
And she's got a really resilient bully, which, as you process the story, you're like, well, what is going on in that bully's home? I think that's one of those things that starts to open for you. So anyway,
That's a great point. Yeah.
That was what hit me the first time I read this. And then for this reading for the podcast, I was like, oh, I never want to send my daughter to school. Because like, kids are still kids. Yeah. It's just going to happen.
I think that goes back to what we said at the top, the universality of this. There is a timelessness quality to it, because you're right. Kids are kids. And if you went to school, if you're going to school now, you went to school 20 years ago, 40 years ago, whatever it is, bullies are bullies. And the way that kids fall into or find out what that hierarchy is, again, for better, for worse, a lot of it's for worse, but it always happens. You start slotting into places, and that's where you become. And you're right. The only way to change that is to make a choice of like, well, I don't want to be the kid on the bottom anymore. So what do I got to do? Either I have to find a way to move up, or I got to find someone below me. I got to extend the bottom down. Yeah. And that's a natural way that kids fall into it, because it's like the only thing that they can they have any control over, because they're going to school, not because they really want to, because they have to, right? You get sent to school, you go to class, you do all the stuff here, but what you can control at that age is how you interact with other kids. And you being the role, you set what those parameters are. And yeah, if the bully's name is Taylor, and you're right, you think about what her life might be like, what's her home life like, you don't get any sense of that, but you can make inferences, you can fill those gaps in based on the kids that you grew up with, probably.
Well, the kids you grew up with, and the fact that, like, I think what is so compelling to me about Barbara as a character is her lack of filter. Like, she's always got a zinger. Yeah. And she's always got, she in some ways is a bully. Like, people may be responding to her very strong character.
Yeah.
The fact that, like, the gym teacher says, like, one thing to her and she just shreds the gym teacher.
Yeah. Like, wildly inappropriate under any circumstance.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And it literally slaps the guidance counselor and like all of this stuff. And it's just like, on one hand, it's like some of the stuff I was thinking, like spitting in the bully's hand, objectively hilarious.
Yeah.
But it's one of those where it's like, can you just spare yourself a little bit of, like, do you have to make everything so much harder? But that's what makes her a compelling character. Is she is at the wheel the whole time.
Yeah. And this is what I think this is part of what I was saying about what I connected. It's her journey as a character. You're right. The idea of like every choice she makes seemingly is not the wrong one, but it's the path of most resistance.
Right.
And it's early on, like she doesn't even understand that there's another path, that there is a path of like, you can let that slide and avoid it and avoid the hassle. It's almost like she's inviting that. She's inviting conflict, because I think the way that she has constructed this fantasy that she's in, the way that she can deal with reality is through conflict. It's like that's the only way she knows how to process. And so in every interaction, doesn't matter if it's the guidance counselor, gym teacher, the principal, her own sister, her family, her D&D crew, her new best friend, her like only friend in Sophie who shows up, literally every interaction she has to be confrontational. She has to have an adversary. Otherwise she doesn't know how to function. And you're right. There is a sense of just like, there's a part of you that's almost just like, oh God, kid, just grow up,
I know. Which is definitely where like her siblings and parents,
Yeah. But then you remind yourself, okay, well, like, what was I like as a 10-year-old kid in the 4th and 5th grade?
Let's not get into that. Yeah.
Well, yeah. And like,
let's leave that alone.
Like what I know was like, I was not great, you know. What was I this bad? I don't know, but like the idea of intentionally being kind of a jerk to people who not even pissed you off, just like set you off a little bit, and just intentionally being like wildly sarcastic and overly snarky and all of that stuff is like, I look back at that kid and it's like, what the hell's your problem, man? Like, you don't have any problems. You know, what are you
Right.
doing? But like Barbara actually has some problems. That doesn't excuse her all of her behavior, but there's an explanation there, and especially when we see what her defense mechanism is for all of this, and that just it's all part and parcel with it. And it's a, watching her grow on that journey and come to some understanding, and you know, just to see her, you know, how different is she at the end of the story? Yeah, I think we see some growth there, and I think that's, you're right. It's what makes her so compelling is that she's able to find a way through. I don't want to call it a delusion or a fantasy, but it's defense mechanism, right? That's what it is.
Right. So here's the lesser version of this story. The lesser version of this story is a character that is like so sad and pathetic that they get bullied and they just think of all these zingers to themselves and like,
Right.
you know, write them down in their notebook, and they're like, oh yeah, I could have said this, this, and this, but they never do anything.
Yeah.
And, you know, people just keep beating on them anyway. And it's just like, well, you know, now it's just a sob fest. You know, it's like, I like that, like, we're still 100% on her side, even though she does and says horrible things. We see what they're in reaction to.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's a complex character because, you know, by any account, you know, if you weren't reading the story and you just got that scene with the gym teacher,
Yeah.
you'd be like, this kid's the worst. Like,
I-
I don't care
100%,
what's
yeah.
going on at home.
Yeah.
You cannot just like verbally assault your gym teacher like this.
You can't physically
in front
assault
of
your guidance
everyone.
counselor. Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
you can't physically assault there. So it's like, but with the context, it's like, ooh, I wish you hadn't done that. Still on your side, still Team Barbara, but like do better.
And I think this is where the guidance counselor, you know, Mrs. I guess
Everybody
it's
gets
pronounced
one.
Mollet,
Yeah.
with the accent on the E there, you know, she is someone who, yeah, I mean, she is. I mean, the way she's presented is almost kind of like unimpeachable character in terms, you know, in terms of
Right.
her patience and resilience and understanding and all of that. But you're right, there is the, you know, she does have that great scene though. I think, is Barbara sitting on the bench? She's playing with the dead bird.
Yeah.
I think it is, and Ms. Mollet just basically comes out and that's when if you hadn't figured out what was going on with the story, in terms of what Barbara's dealing with, that's where it's laid bare. That's issue like 4 or 5 or something like that, where she just basically yells at her like, you know, your mother is dying of cancer. You have to deal with this. You
Yeah,
can't
it's number
kill it.
5.
It's yeah. And so if you hadn't put kind of the context clues together, that's where it's laid bare of this is what's actually happening, and everything that Barbara is thinking and seeing and feeling is her trying to deal and cope with the idea of death, of impending death. So yeah, that character, that guidance counselor, Miss Mollet, is really just this like kind of super idealized, like she is the adult character that you want to have in a story, right?
Right. And that many don't have. Like, which is why I'm, you know, what I said earlier is like,
does that person even exist? I'm sure it does, but yeah, someone with that infinite level of patient understanding, you know, infinite level of empathy and but also like drive and determination. Like
the
she's not
commitment, right.
Yeah, she's not going to give up on Barbara, and she understands. It's like she sees through Barbara immediately and knows what the end goal is and is determined to get there however path it may take. You know, like first, you know, we see a couple of false starts with kind of whatever her guidance and her therapy is, but she's not going to give up. She's not going to let this kid wallow or flounder in her life. She's not going to let her keep getting beaten up. She's not going to let her
she's
retreat.
the Robin Williams from Good Will Hunting, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like,
yeah. Yeah, but without like the personal baggage, as far as we know,
Right.
that Robin Williams character had.
No, yeah, but this is just someone who can take endless abuse because they really refuse to give up on a
Yeah,
person,
yeah,
despite how they're treated, and it's a
yeah, yeah,
very deliberate choice.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But you're right. It's the character that it is so rare in real life to have. And if you have someone like that in your life, whether they're a teacher, a mentor, or what, if you have someone like that in your life, I mean, how blessed are you?
Right.
I mean, to
Well,
have
but
someone
the
like
thing is,
that.
most of us are Barbara, and we
Yeah,
don't realize we have that person when we have them, like in real time. And that's
1000%.
another
Yeah,
very painful aspect of this. It's like
yeah.
any time now, this guidance counselor is well within her right to just give up, to just let you
Walk away. Oh,
go.
oh yeah,
And only then will you realize how much she had your back. She was looking out for you.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And when you feel the absence of that, you will know, what you've.
yeah, 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 yeah.
So I don't really have a plan for how to talk about this book.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of just took notes chapter by chapter as I was
Mhm.
going, but that's not really a plan. They're just kind of, a hodgepodge of
Story notes.
notes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I guess let's think about this in terms of why we picked it for one of our discussions this month
Oh,
in
sure.
terms
Yeah.
of
Death month. Yeah.
Death Month. I think we hinted at it in the last week the idea of changing the perspective, right? So Swan Songs was very deliberately like where all those six stories about the ending of something. How do you deal with the end of all these different things? What that says about what dying is in kind of different contexts. Last week with Layla Starr, this idea of really kind of death and reincarnation, right? What does it mean?
Yeah.
What does it mean to live forever, or potentially live forever? What does it mean if death is no longer something that hangs over you? How do you view life through the idea of eternal life, immortality? And here, changing the perspective, looking at it through the eyes of a child or a young person, someone who hasn't lived. And I think something we got with Layla Starr last week when we followed the life of Darius, right? As death dropped in on all his different points in life, right? As a child, first experiencing death of someone he knew and someone he was close to. As a young person, losing the death of a friend. As an adult, losing the death of his wife, of his partner, and then the end of his own life as he faces his own immortality. We don't really get his perspective. We get a third party looking at what this person is going through. Here we get Barbara's perspective. We get a child's perspective. So it's like we're in the head of Darius as an 8-year-old kid. Barbara's not too much older than Darius was in what chapter 2 of Layla Starr last week. So we're looking at the idea of death, and here it's literalized as a monster. Death
Right.
is a giant, a titan, is a monster. It's a thing to be frightened of. It's a thing to fight, implying it's a thing you can beat,
Yeah.
which I think is and is not meant to be pejorative. It's literally a childlike way of looking at death, and that's the lesson that Barbara has to learn in the end. That the fighting and the beating of the titan, the winning against the giant, isn't stopping death. That life is in the fight. That
Right.
it's about the living. That actually, I think I just may have inadvertently quoted The West Wing, which is not out of the ordinary for us.
Well, inadvertently doing it is.
Well, yeah, that's true. As soon as I said it, it sparked something. There's a scene in The West Wing where Toby is meeting with a senator that just got voted out, and she was voted out because she sponsored
Oh,
a
yeah.
bill that they knew was going to die. Something that she
It's
believed
like a
in.
gas tax for the national parks or something.
Yeah, it was an environmental
like
kind of
wildly
thing.
unpopular.
It was something that she knew she was going to lose, but she introduced it. Ended up losing her seat by like 30 some odd votes or something like that. It was tough, and they're trying to offer her something else as like, hey, thanks for being with us and taking that bullet for us. But ultimately, they can't because of all these machinations. And she responds to Toby basically with being like, listen, like it's in the fight that's living. It's not about the results. It's about going and standing up and speaking what you believe in, having the conviction to go and stand up and say, this is what I believe. This is who I am. This is what it is. And even in a loss, you get up and you start again. But it's about the fight, you know? And I think this is the lesson that Barbara is taught, you know, when we have that scene where I guess to the outside viewer, she's fighting a nor'easter. You know,
Right.
but in her mind, she's fighting the giant, and she hears that voice, and it's all things that live die. You know, this is why you must find joy in the living while the time is yours, and not fear the end, because to deny this is to deny life. So living in fear, cowering, and thinking that death is anything other than inevitable is not living life of the fullest. And I think that is something that if you were a young person, and not again, not even as young as Barbara is, but someone who hasn't lived a lot of life, that can be a hard thing to understand. And I know it was a hard thing for me to understand at 18 when one of my best friends was died. You know, it's a hard thing to understand of even then when at 18, that's the acme of invulnerability, right? Where you think, you know, that you are untouchable, you know,
Right.
you think you know everything, that oh, we know, about to move on to this next phase of life. I'm now quote unquote an adult. You know, I am invulnerable, and to have that
My
shattered.
favorite is when people going off to college say like, you know, it's so good to be independent now. I'm like,
Yeah.
but your parents are paying your tuition, room, and
Yeah.
board, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I'm like, yeah, you're so independent.
There's still some structure there. You're still eating at the dining hall, right? It means you're not making your own meals and all that stuff. But that idea of finding joy and understanding that life is in the living. And for me, I mean, if I had read a book like this and gotten that kind of message then, I think I would have taken the same kind of lesson. What I ultimately got, I mentioned last week, Death of the Endless from Sandman. And I quoted some of those lines about, you know, you got what everyone gets. You got a lifetime. And that helped me at a time when, in very rapid succession, like lost a best friend, lost my grandfather, lost my uncle, in back to back to back years. And so trying to understand and cope and wrap my mind around the idea of dying and what that means to live. If you can die at 18 or at 40 or at 60, whatever it was my grandfather passed away at, you know, what does it mean? And I think the lesson that Barbara gets here, again, if you were to give this to someone who maybe has gone through or is going through something that Barbara, a similar situation like Barbara, I think that message would land so cleanly for a child, for someone younger as they're still
Yeah.
trying to develop. And it's that even as an adult, even someone who has experienced some amount of life, I can still put myself back there and think like, oh yeah, you know, these are important things. This is the universality of this story, the timelessness of the story, that it's something that we can be reminded of at any time. Because I think it's something that's easy to lose sight of, that life is in the living, which sounds reductive and stupid, but that's what it is. You have to find joy in that. You have to experience it. And the fact that it's being delivered to a child here, I think, is where this book has something different. The fact that you're almost forced to put yourself into the through Barbara's eyes. You're put in her perspective. So you're asked to think about the world like she does, like a child would, not as whatever age that you're reading this, but you're bringing your experience with you. And I think that's the thing I like about reading and rereading this book, is getting that perspective and having that perspective forced upon you as an adult, getting the child's perspective and forcing you to see the world in that way, and which I think means at times being very frustrated with Barbara, the way that
Oh yeah.
adults can be frustrated with a child. But I think that's the point is to understand that this is tough on kids. These things
Yeah.
are hard on them. And
Well,
yeah,
and
they're going to
older
act out
siblings
or
and
they're,
adults and even
yeah, yeah,
like no one is given an instruction manual on these
yeah,
things.
yeah,
This
yeah,
is
yeah,
it's one of those things that people and you can't simulate it. I also had friends die when I was 16, 18, and 20, and then all four grandparents within, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. So it was a lot of death before the
Mhm.
age of 30. And it doesn't get easier, but it is one of those things when you're the 18-year-old who's lost a friend and you're talking to your other 18-year-old friend who's not going through the grief.
Yeah,
Even if they want to be a good friend, they literally don't know how. Like they
yeah,
just don't have a grid for it, and
yeah,
and it's not their fault.
yeah,
It's just one of those things that it's like, yeah, I mean the friend who, and all of mine, at least my friends' deaths were all like unexpected. I can't even
yeah.
imagine this,
That
at that
yeah,
age of
that
like she's upstairs
yeah.
and I know she's dying.
Yeah, and there's nothing you can do about it, right? Yeah, I think that's a
There's
really great
almost
point.
something more
Yeah,
merciful about,
oh
like
yeah,
my friend was like, babysitting his younger sibling, felt funny, laid down, had a seizure, was not epileptic, was dead.
yeah.
And, another friend felt sick for a couple weeks, went to the hospital. They said, we don't know what's wrong with you. And he died. And
My friend died in a car accident.
car
But yeah,
accident. Yeah.
it's a. You're right. That I think that is an important distinction here, specifically with this story. This idea of impending death.
Right.
So
The
it is
anticipation of
yeah,
death. Because
right.
the other books we've done are all like, I guess like that one about getting the Home and Garden magazine and Swan Songs is like, that's the impending death of Swan
Yeah, yeah,
Songs.
and
But
there
it's way different.
it does, but there was a similar theme here, right? The idea of the theme of that story, that was issue 1 of Swan Songs, was the idea of finding joy in the little things, because
Right.
that character, his mother was dying, but there was also a nuclear holocaust going on outside, so everyone was going to die. She was dying from a sickness, but the nuclear clock was literally counting down, and everyone was going to die, regardless of health status or whatever. But it was about finding the little points, the little bits of joy there. So yeah, in a way, I Kill Giants here is about Barbara dealing with. It's not about her dealing with death; it's her dealing with the idea of death. Because by the time her mother actually passes, she's already gone through her journey. So this isn't about a child reacting, because there's also a story there, right? There could be a story there in terms of what is Barbara doing after her mother has passed. She could still create this fantasy. She could still have the same idea of striking and fighting against giants, thinking that if she had only done that before, maybe she could have saved her mom. Right? There's still
Right.
there's a similar kind of story there, but the idea that it's impending and that she can't literally can't process the idea that her mother will be taken from her. And there's nothing she can do about it. That she has to craft this world where she feels like she can. That's, I think, where this book is different than the books we've talked about and we will talk about next week with Day Tripper.
Yeah.
That's an important distinction.
Oh my. Yeah. Huge inversion of Day Tripper.
Yeah.
So there's a couple quotes early on that hit different on a reread.
Okay.
When she first meets Sophia, first of all, like, I feel nothing but positive things about Sophia.
Yeah.
It's like, totally great friend, very understandable reaction to accidentally getting punched, yada, yada. But, when she first meets her, it's very clear that Barbara is like kind of excited about a friend who might not think she's weird, might actually think what she's doing is interesting.
Yeah.
But then she says at the end of issue 2, you don't want to get close to me, Sophia. People close to me die.
Yeah.
And it's like, at the time, your first time reading that, you're like, oh, is that a reference to like the way she runs her D&D campaigns,
Yeah.
which it was like the swift hammer of justice as the
Yeah.
dungeon master, or is it, no one can face these giants except me?
Yeah.
On the reread, it is obviously
It's literal. Yeah.
it's literal,
Yeah.
but nothing she has set up to that point is literal. So Sophia, there's no reason for her to take it
Yeah.
literally. There's no reason for the reader to take it literally until you're rereading.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I think just the way they like trickle out this information is kind of masterful writing. Which, by the way, they are both attributed as writers on the movie. I did see that.
I think that's just how it's done with comic adaptations in terms of because
Okay, yeah,
they're
because it's a
yeah.
creative team and they didn't know how to split
Yeah,
it.
yeah. So, but so I think that is just how it goes. But one thing you said, sorry, I don't want to cut off your other
No,
point
no, no.
there.
That was my point.
You talk about in terms of how they dole out information. So like at what point did you know what was going on with Barbara and her home life? Because obviously anytime they would talk about they would mention mother or mom or anything like that, you would see the word scratched out. There's like a whole conversation that Karen has with Barbara and Dave, their brother. That obviously we get from Barbara's point of view, where everything that Karen says is just scratched out because obviously she's not hearing it. Like she's intentionally blocking that out. And we see like anytime she would get close to the stairs, we would get that
Right.
depiction of someone calling out for her and all that. At what point did you get a sense of what we were dealing with? Was it something you felt you had to figure out?
No, I didn't find myself like guessing. I was just along for the ride.
Yeah, okay.
And when you read the whole thing in one sitting as a binge, it doesn't really feel like you're in suspense that long because the word blotting out is middle way through issue 3 and the reveals like page 2 of issue 5.
Yeah.
And I think there are two confusing issues. Just I think in terms of like storytelling
Okay.
with all of the fantasy elements, and that's issues 4 and issue 6. 6 is the big battle.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's, very
okay.
unclear to me what's happening a lot of the time there or what their conversation is really about. When he says, can you embrace this? You're stronger than you think. It's like, I don't know why the Titan's on her side all of a sudden, other than, this is like, she's learning the lesson she has to learn, yada, yada, yada.
Well,
and then you get to issue 7 and you're like, oh, there was actually a tornado on Long Island.
Yeah.
So she, like, the weather literally played into her fantasy for this climactic moment. That was kind of nice. And then issue 4, the bullies turned Sophie and, the harbingers are appearing more and more frequently. So, like, anytime her world is getting more distorted by this stuff, I felt a little disoriented. Especially when there wasn't as much like dialogue.
But I can say I think I agree with you on issue 4 when it's her and like other people around, and there's little uncertain as to like what is she seeing and what is so I'm sorry. We know what Barbara's seeing because that's what's on the page, but what are the people around her seeing her see? But at issue 6 though, I do think 6 is I didn't have I didn't bump on it the same way I think with 4. I'm with you on issue 4. I think when she's facing basically the giant in the water, the Titan in the water there, as it speaks to her, whatever it is that's speaking to her, whether it's just her inner monologue or whatever it is, it says to her like, I'm not here for your mom. I'm here for you, which is
Right.
the idea of that. I'm not here to kill your mom. Thus, you killing me doesn't save your mom. I'm here for you in terms of not to kill you, but like this is it's almost like this is a test. This is what you're supposed to do. This is your trial, as it were. And I can see that being, because as we find out, like she's somehow lost at sea for a couple days. So it's almost like people on the beach are watching Barbara go into the storm willingly while she's having this vision and having this conversation here. I can see how there'd be panic there because, again, she ends up being missing for a few days. But issue 4, there is a little, I think there's a little mixing of what is fantasy, what is reality, what are people seeing here. But I do think that plays into what the vibe of the story is, because how often is she just like talking to pixies and fairies and all that, you
Right.
know? How often they appear and things like that in terms of, so what is she seeing versus what other people are seeing her see. I think you're meant to be a little off guard there. I'm meant to be a little questioning of what's actually happening, what she's seeing, and how she is in a way disassociating with the world. It's different when she's by herself versus when she's around other people, and she's still disassociating.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, again, in the context of the story, you just roll with the punches,
Yeah.
even when you hit a confusing issue. I think what a lot of indie comics do that can be alienating, or, ones that I think are really good, but sometimes flop, is if these guys had decided to start issue one in the style of issue four, where it was like a steep learning curve of what's going on, what's not going on. Is this a fantasy story,
Start
or is this
start
an
you with
imagination? Right.
yeah.
Like they could start you in like a confusing place, but I think they wanted to be accessible to a lot of readers, whilst like they convey all of the artistry and all of the beautiful narrative and story and everything that you would by telling an intentionally confusing story, but they say it with such clarity that I think this is accessible, and you could give this to a middle schooler. Granted, there are probably some comebacks that she uses that I would not want a middle schooler to learn.
Yeah. But then that is true.
But what
But
don't you hear in middle school already?
yeah,
I mean,
that's the other thing. Like there's nothing that's said here that like they probably don't see online somewhere. You know. But
we just heard it all in my school.
yeah. Oh, yeah. It's same. But I agree with you that this is, I mean, in terms of messaging, in terms of what a kid of that age could get out of this book, absolutely. I think, again, not even necessarily someone who is going through the things or has gone through the things that Barbara goes through. I think giving it to any kid is that there's a lesson here that you can learn that isn't being preachy, you know?
Right.
Yeah, it's emotionally manipulative, dead/dying mom is intentionally manipulative, but there's still a very strong, meaningful, worthwhile lesson. Again, that you can, so a kid's going to read that and take something from it at 13, 14, 15 or whatever. They'll take something different at 20, 22, 23, different in their 30s, different in their 40s, at different stages of life. You'll read the same words, you'll see the same panels, you'll run through the same sequences and just pull different things because your life experience is different, you know? And I think that's what makes this book really, really great.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, there are more great quotes scattered throughout this book. Is there anything more that kid at that age than her saying, "I'm a little mean to people who are dumb, and most people are dumb"?
Yeah.
You know, not exactly a thesis statement for the book, but that might be the quote for the podcast episode.
I mean, but you're right though. That is quintessentially childlike. It's the way that a kid of that age, it's the way that I would have thought about the world then,
Oh yeah. I
Everyone's
would have
dumber
said
than me.
that.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Well, actually, no, I would have been different. I would have been the kid who says, I'm smarter than everyone else.
Yes.
I would have been the kid that raises himself up versus lowers everybody else. The end result is the same, but it's not that like I'm regular and everyone's dumber than me. At that age, for me, it would have been I'm smarter than everybody else. I know all of this stuff. But yeah, you're 10, you don't know jack.
Right.
You're 15, you don't know jack. You're 18, you don't know jack. You're 24, you don't know jack. But you think you do. And you're right. That is a perfect thesis for who Barbara is at the start of the story. And if you understand that and they get that across, and again, everything we see her do, everything that is depicted on panel, everything that she says reinforces that this is who this kid is. And we're given all the context around as to why it would explain. Again, nothing justifies the things she says and things she does. But you get a full view of why she is like she is, or why she could be like she is, why she ends
Right.
up like that. You get all of that, I think, really beautifully and really, really fully in terms of the type of character she.
Yeah. Yeah. I, so many things to say. I'm like, sadly, I think I probably would have said that well into my 20s. Um, I can be a little mean to people who are dumb, and most people are dumb.
Yeah.
Which I guess just shows how emotionally stunted. I was gonna say men can be, but I'm like, why throw us all under the bus? How emotionally stunted I was. Yeah. Also, great quote: "No fighting in the war room."
Yeah, that I
Just,
mean, yeah,
it's just,
obviously,
it's right
obviously,
there.
a strange love. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so good. Um,
Actually,
yeah. And,
so
and is this a? I assume that's a real player, by the way, Harry Kovaleski.
you know what? I didn't look him up. Probably is.
Well,
Probably is.
I think of you as a baseball guy, so I was like,
Yeah, but
you may not have even needed to look it up. But
question.
then
I mean,
again,
you tell me there's someone named Harry Kovaleski who played for the Phillies back in the day? Yeah, I'm sure there was. But actually, the thing you mentioned the War Room quote, which is obviously very funny. But we kind of glossed over a little bit earlier. But the idea that on top of the world that Barbara creates for her own literal reality, again, we did mention that she's an avid D&D player. She's an avid role player. Specifically, she's a dungeon master. She's a DM. She's in charge of the game. And, it's another layer that she kind of her only social interaction with anybody outside of her family, even though I think her brother Dave is part of the group there, is playing D&D. She doesn't have any other friends outside of that. And even the people in her kind of D&D game don't seem to really appreciate her and like her all that much. But like her one social interaction is living and inhabiting and creating a fantasy world. And then the way she deals with her literal reality is doing the same thing,
right,
So that parallel of the way her mind works, the way that she sees and shapes her reality, that she is shaping a narrative when she does it as a dungeon master for the game, for the campaign that they're playing, and the way that she shapes this narrative of I kill giants. This is what I do. This is who I am. This defines me. It's this story that she creates and projects out that everyone thinks is weird and kind of dumb and silly. All the outsiders do. But this is what she is steadfast on. And the idea and the power, I think, for her of creating story to, I think, in a way, probably to put order into her life, put control over her life, because
oh yeah,
the specter of death is something
anytime
that's so far beyond her control.
someone challenges her
Yeah.
on anything she does or is doing, she's like, I was just sitting here reading a book in class.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
the one who did this. And somebody steps out of line in D&D and she cracks the whip, kills their character.
Yeah.
That took them, years and years to build or whatever.
But it's the idea of control, right? Trying to find
Right.
control.
Yeah. It's like a no pun intended, like a death hold on control,
Yeah,
on everything
yeah.
because gotta control.
Yeah. Because her life is out of control. She can't deal with that. So she finds a way to construct a world, multiple worlds, whatever it is. She finds a way to be in control. And I think that goes back to the idea why she always is confrontational. Because if she's in a fight with someone, even if she loses the fight, like she does essentially every single time against Taylor, her bully, there's at least some control there. It's like she's stepping into the fight. She's choosing to be in this confrontation. So when she gets sent to the principal's office, she's like, yeah, I know, fine, whatever. But like, it's like she made a choice to say this or do this because she knows the outcome is going to be, I'm going to get sent to the principal's office and get detention again or whatever it is. And she's fine. She's accepted that because there's a set outcome there. She knows what's going to happen. And that's better than being reticent and not knowing what's going to happen.
Right. Yeah. It's just one way to keep a hand on the wheel, or you double down on controlling what you can control, which, like people do that at work too. It's like stuff's out of control at home and your boss just becomes a monster at work because it's like, I can't control my kids, my family, whatever. So I'm going to super control what I can control.
Right.
That'll make me feel better. It's like, I promise you it won't.
Yeah.
And you're going to have a bigger mess here.
but it's something we all do. We project whatever thing we're dealing with onto something completely unrelated because we think it's going to help. Whether you do it at every stage of life. You latch onto something because it feels like you're doing something, right? It feels like you're confronting, dealing with, acting upon, solving whatever it is, the thing over to the side, but it's not the thing you actually have to be dealing with because that thing is too big for you or seemingly too big, right?
Right.
That thing is so abstract. That thing is so hard to define that we're going to ignore that. But I'm gonna work on this thing over here, and that's going to satiate me, or I'm going to convince myself it's going to satiate me because that's the thing I can do versus the thing that I know I can't do.
I mean,
And
it
again,
feels like I'm going to do this thing, uh, I, to see if it satiates me because there's literally nothing else to do.
right, yeah, yeah,
Or, this like, especially in this case, it's like, well, I don't know what I'm supposed to, like, I can't start grieving. She's not even gone yet.
yeah, yeah.
Even though what she's doing is obviously grief.
Yeah, well, I think when you're an adult who does this, there's some part of you. Hopefully, there's some self-awareness that deep down isn't helping, but you do it anyway. I think for someone like Barbara, when you are a child, when you are that young, you don't have that thought. You know,
Yeah.
I think
It'd be great if adults had that emotional bandwidth.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But she doesn't have this idea of she doesn't understand that she's projecting. She doesn't understand that she's deflecting. That she is that she's not. She thinks she's dealing with the problem. She thinks this is how I'm dealing with the problem. When really what she's doing is running from it. She's hiding from it. But she doesn't know that because you don't have the life experience to know that. And that's what it takes someone like Ms. Millay, to tell her and confront her and eventually force it onto her. But still, even after she confronts her about it, she still takes another issue and a half, 2 issues to really come to the realization. She still has to face the monster she creates or she envisions before she's able to have that realization or revelation or whatever you want to call it. That epiphany, that aha moment. But yeah, she just, you're right. She just doesn't have the emotional experience to know that what she's doing is hiding. Because again, I think she truly believes she is dealing with this because she doesn't know anything else.
Right.
But when you read it as an adult, again, what we said before, so many things she says and does, the thought is just, oh, come on, kid, just grow up.
Right.
Stop being a kid. Stop being what you are, that you have, that you can't be anything else. You can't force upon her to have the life experience and perspective of someone 2, 3, 4 times their age. But yet when you read it, you can get frustrated with her, but at the same time, you can empathize with her. At least if you're an emotionally intelligent reader,
Right.
you can be frustrated with her and also still empathize with her and understand and put yourself in the shoes of what a child is going through. And you can see what she's struggling with and what she's dealing with, and you can understand and still be frustrated with her because she is still a child. But you can hold those ideas, both those ideas in your head. You can still have both those thoughts and have them not be contradictory.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's a heavy book for being what it is.
It is.
And I think a little bit heavier than anything we've done so far because, we weren't that close to the person dying in Many Deaths of Layla Starr.
Yeah.
I mean, anytime Layla Starr died, we knew she wasn't really dead.
But
And so it's the guy who's curing death who's dying at the end.
Yeah.
And we're actually kind of happy for him because of the place he's landed.
Because of his journey that he's gone through. Yeah, yeah.
Right. Swan songs, all of them had accepted or been resigned to some fate about the end of whatever it was they were doing.
Yeah.
Whereas
death from a
this
different
one is
perspective.
one is the person like fighting against the inevitable, and the futility of that is painful.
I think also because we're not following the person who died. We're not following the mother. This isn't her story.
Right.
This is we're journeying with the character as she experiences the idea of death. The other books that we've talked about, and the books we're following essentially the person, the idea of what dying is. We're with that person, we're with that perspective. This is looking at death from the outside. We're given that different perspective, and so we are looking through the process through her eyes. And I think because Barbara is she's presented in such a full and complete way, you understand everything about her, what she's going through. Again, you don't have to agree with it, you don't have to like it, but you're given a complete picture. To the point of every time they mention their father, complete non-character. All you got to know is, not in the picture, not around, didn't show up.
Right.
You don't need the specifics. All you have to know is he wasn't there and he's never been there.
Right.
So that informs who the character is. You see her relationship with her siblings, with her D&D group, with Taylor, with her teachers, authority in general. We get everything about Barbara as a full and complete character. So we're with her on this journey, on this arc, and it's that much more meaningful, I think, because you're right. There's some part of her story that you're going to connect with. There's some part of her that I think you're going to read and connect with something in it, whether it's the bullying part, maybe it's the kind of the bookish nerdiness, the introversion, the reticence to be around people. Maybe it's the home life aspect. Whatever it is about it, there's some part I'm sure that you're going to connect with and latch on with, and you're going to be with her on this ride. So when she goes through her journey and comes to that revelation and is forced to deal with reality, we're there with her. And so it does hit on a deeper emotional level because, again, we've been riding with her the entire time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you rate this book? I mean, and is this one that you recommend often, or is it a circumstantial
This is not one, I think, because it is a more recent read for me. It is not one I've recommended as often yet. I do think this one maybe is a little more specific because it is so tied to a singular death, and about that journey of understanding. I could see this being one I would potentially recommend to a younger,
Okay.
I could see, and again, maybe not Barbara's age of 10 or 11, but someone in that maybe middle school, high school range. If you see this as someone that they're struggling with or working through how to process, I think this is a book that can be helpful for someone like that. I'm not saying it's not helpful to read it as an adult. Not saying you can't get anything out of it. You absolutely can. But I think this one, unlike something like Layla Starr we talked about last week, or next week when we talk about Day Tripper, those are books I think I would give and recommend to anybody because I love them so much. I think there's a little more specificity to this, even though I do think the message is very universal. I think this one can be a little more potent if the recommendation is a little more targeted.
Yeah. I think that's wise. Obviously, us covering it on the podcast is our tacit blanket endorsement.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah.
We've
But I think
never covered anything we don't recommend, even when we've gotten nitpicky with stuff.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I think back to a book like The Seeds, and I'm like, I think we were probably a little hard on that one just because it was a difficult read. But I have returned to that book and enjoy it, and have a very large poster on my wall now behind me.
Yeah. And I would recommend that not to anybody because it's a tougher read.
No, you have to be a sophisticated reader for that one.
It's a harder reader book, but it's a book that I would recommend to you find someone who I think would connect with it. I wouldn't hesitate 1 second to recommend that. So yeah, not every book we talk about is for everybody. We understand that. But I think because this book specifically, I Kill Giants, is a kind of deeper emotional book. And again, in some ways manipulative, and I think intentionally so, or at least that's what the outcome ends up being. I think you might be a little more delicate in terms of who you might give this to, but I do think you give this to the right person. it can connect incredibly hard and incredibly deep for that reader. And I think something like that is a good thing when you can connect with art and story in that way. But I rate this book very highly. It is not one. It's a tougher one to go back to because I think it puts you in a harder emotional place. But I think it's one that can be very cathartic if read at the right time with the right kind of mindset for it. On a reread, I mean,
Oh, I was gonna
when
say,
when you know
I
what you're getting
actually
into,
prefer
when you know what you're getting into,
reading
yeah,
it when I'm not going through that
yeah,
because it reminds me of, it's like,
yeah,
and especially when so many of the deaths I've dealt with are sudden and
yeah.
unexpected. It's like, I haven't had a long wind up one like this other than like a grandfather dealing with
Same, yeah,
Alzheimer's.
same, yeah, yeah. Having a grandparent dealing with a long sickness, and knowing that the end is inevitable, and in it, and there is the idea of like that person has accepted it, but everyone around them has not yet. It's like
Yes.
and we see that here. Like her mother is like she just wants to spend time with her daughter because she knows she doesn't have much time left, and Barbara can't deal with that. So she has to get on that level, because it's much scarier for the people on the outside than the person who's going through it.
Right.
But I agree with you. There is, even when the death is sudden and unexpected, there are still things you can connect. There's still lessons that are being given here, being shown here, being taught here that are applicable and that are good reminders, of the kind of things that people go through. And you're right, it isn't just meant to be read in times of distress or grief or anything like that. You can still connect with it, even when you aren't in that kind of mindset. It can hit both ways, and it hit very hard in either case.
Yeah. That is the end of my notes. I'm ready to dive into the A Tripper,
I have,
the
I
wild palate cleanser.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. I do have one last thing I want to talk about.
Oh,
And
yeah.
this has
Let's go.
nothing to do. We've covered story and theme and all that stuff. I do want to mention because I think I mentioned this. I'm sure I mentioned it during the Zero episode. But this book, came out again, single issue from mid 2008 to early 2009. I think the last issue was January 2009. Trade comes out in probably late 2010-ish or in 2009, something like that. But in 2011, it won gold at the International Manga Award, which was a award that was given out. I don't think it is anymore, but it was given out to recognize the best non-Japanese manga art and storytelling. So and Ken Niimura is half Japanese. I think he is Portuguese Japanese. I think it is. So he has that in him. But obviously, you look at this, the artwork is wildly influenced by, like, you could look at this and
I mean, I said
almost
that at the end
assume,
of last week. I said,
yeah, yeah,
if you were flipping right to left, you would just assume this was all being translated from Japanese.
it very well could be. So the influence is obvious. It is, and I wanted to recognize that this is manga is not just, it's like champagne, right? Like champagne's got to
Right.
come from champagne, of that it's like sparkling wine or whatever. But manga and this style can come from, it's a vibe, it's an aesthetic, it's a feel, and I know I've personally said I'm someone who doesn't read manga. It's not something I engage with, but like, good story is good story, good storytelling is good storytelling. And this is, I think, is an example of that. And for it to be recognized in that way by Japan, by a body whose sole purpose was to identify what they felt was exceptional storytelling in their traditional style. That's what I Kill Giants is.
Oh, well, I mean,
So,
and it is very on brand for manga for the character to be living in the real world and then have this fantasy world in their head that
yeah,
gets
yeah.
depicted, through crude sketches and stuff like this. So like, yeah, I
The
mean, if
magical
I
realism aspect. Yeah.
right, well, yeah, and if I went into my local manga shop and I was like, yeah, there's the story I'm thinking of where like this girl, like there's no actual magic happening in the story, but like this girl is like, kind of bullied and whatnot, and her plays out her fantasies as this and this, they'd probably come up with 10 titles that aren't I Kill Giants
Yeah,
and be
yeah.
like, oh, is it this one? Is it this one? Is it this one?
A- And this is a book that you could sell in a manga shop and that wouldn't feel out of place, you know,
100%.
just because
If
the
you
writer
like this,
happens,
you'll like that.
yeah, yeah, just
Is
because the writer
the
happens to be someone who's written
simple formula.
a bunch of issues of Amazing Spider-Man, it doesn't matter. This if what you're into is the style and the feel again and the vibe, this fits right in. It fits right in with Western comics, and it fits right in with Japanese comics. It is it's a I don't want to say a perfect blend, but it's a really really good blend of those styles there that kind of crosses that whatever line we draw in terms of what the genres are of like what Western comics are on this side and Eastern comics are on this side, whatever imaginary line we think divides them, that's a lot blurry than we think it is, or a lot of people think it is. This is one that crosses because again, good storytelling is good storytelling. Good character is good character. Good emotion is good emotion. It doesn't matter what style it is. It doesn't matter who's writing, who's drawing it. I- if you if it's done at the high level, if it's done competently, if it's done smartly, and with kind of exceptional acumen and skill, like it's going to translate. People are going to find it. People are going to like it. They're going to read it. And they're going to keep reading it. And your publisher is going to keep putting out different editions, different printings, different anniversary issues,
Right.
because it's a book that people want to keep reading. And it doesn't matter that it's a quote unquote Eastern style in a quote unquote Western market. None of that stuff matters. They're not try. I don't. They're not. I'm sure they weren't like, hey, let's do a crossover book. They weren't trying to do anything like that. I
No,
think they were
it's just what suits it. It's
just
like
again, just trying to
it's how
tell
you
the
see it in
story.
your head.
Exactly,
Yeah.
just trying to tell the story, and it happens to span that, and it just works because it's good. It's not about genre or style or anything like that. It's just a good story, and I think that's a thing that you and I like to celebrate. What thing we kind of want to highlight here, and this is just one that happens to be about the topic that we've been covering this month so far. Death and dying.
Yeah, and I don't think we would have busted this out as a one shot
No,
without a
no,
theme month like this.
no, no, no,
Um,
no. But
just
but
because,
but we could have though.
yeah, no, we could have. It's just like it hadn't been. We've got it like I don't know, 30, 40 titles in the hopper that we always kind of
Yeah,
kick around.
yeah, 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 yeah.
And what made us think of this one was we decided to do Death Month, and then you start looking through your bookshelf with a very specific filter,
Yeah,
and it's like,
yeah.
oh, I Kill Giants. That's an obvious choice.
You're right. Yeah, it is. Once we go down that road of what books can give us different ideas, different thoughts, different meditations on death and dying. This is one that pops up immediately, I think, for both you and I, because it is a different kind of story presentation, in terms of what we've seen already with Swan Songs and Layla Starr, and definitely what we're going to see next week with Day Tripper. It's a different, it's just a different look and a different perspective, a different thought process in terms of how to tell story about this idea. And I think it's one that it's important. It's an important reminder, I think, the child viewpoint, the younger viewpoint, the less experienced life viewpoint of this is real. This is what kids go through. Maybe not every kid does exactly like this, but again, that specificity I think can be universal there. Kids are naturally, in this case, they very much can retreat into themselves. Maybe it's not a fantasy world. Maybe it's not about seeing and killing giants, but the idea of isolation that a child is going to feel or can feel is very, very real. Whether they're dealing with sickness of a parent or the loss of a parent or being the new kid, being the weirdo, being the one that gets picked on and bullied. All those things are what this book is messaging on, which is why I think it endures.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. Well said. Beautiful book. I just can't get enough of this book. Like I finished rereading it for this and was like, ready to just flip back to the beginning and go through it one more time because it's like it builds on itself so well.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be any longer. It doesn't need a follow-up series or anything like that.
Yeah.
You just get a new hit every time you read the book because there's just always something there, some connective tissue, and it's one of those great tapestries where like you're different every time you read it.
Exactly.
You're in a
Yeah.
different place, so something else is going to jump out and get you. That would have seemed like in passing or maybe not even registered at all at another time. So yeah,
Exactly.
and,
Yep.
and that's something that death books in general offer, but this one does it very,
100%.
very
I think if there's definitely a theme that we've another theme on the theme of Death Month is that because stories about death are ultimately stories about life and living, where you are in your life and what you've experienced at specific points when you read and consume these stories and kind of intake them affects what you get out of them. And the way that you change and evolve and the experiences you go through that are specific to you are going to change when you read this book or any of these books at specific points in your life, and this falls right in line with those types of stories, which is why I think stories like these endure, why they are generally evergreen, and people always return to them because death is universal constant, as all these books remind us. No matter what we do, death is inevitable. And so how we approach that end, how we think about that end, how we perceive that end is what these books are exploring. What each one of the titles we've picked for this month and the myriad number of books that we didn't that deal with the same issue all have the same conclusion, which is you can't cheat death. That comes for everybody. So what happens in between? How do you approach it? How do you think about it? How do you deal with it? And variations on that theme are what provoke the different thoughts in your own mind as the reader. They jog and ignite different parts of your brain, different thought processes, which hopefully give you a more well-rounded and wider view of the specter of death, the idea of death. Maybe makes it a little more accepting, a little more tolerable, makes it a little more palatable, a little more concrete than the abstract idea that it seems to be.
Yeah. And hopefully, makes you as much as possible better equipped for it when you deal with it in whatever capacity you'll deal with it.
As much as you can be, as much as you can be. Yeah.
As much as you can be, but not just for you, for the other people around you. Because if you're not, someone else is going through this right now. And read it from that angle. Just read it from the angle of, the guidance counselor who is insisting on helping someone who claims they don't want help, but is clearly acting out.
Yeah.
And, that's a whole new vantage point. And that's an insanely positive way to read this book.
Yeah. 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 Maybe you're Barbara.
Look at the gift you can be to someone else. By being present, by noticing, by paying attention to people who are hurting.
Yeah.
And I think, that it's just another one of those beautiful things where, perhaps you've, passed through a season like that and you can look back and be like, you know what? I was not great to the people around me, but they were great to me.
Yeah.
And
you can look back in hindsight. Yeah.
And
then maybe
hopefully be thankful, express that in some way.
Yeah. And then the next time around, because there's going to be a next time around. Because again,
or when
everything
the shoe's on the other foot. Right?
Yeah. Maybe you remember that. And maybe you go from being Barbara to being Karen to being Miss Millay. You progress through these various stages in terms of what your responsibility is towards someone else, because you've lived a little more, you've lived a little longer, and maybe as you move further, you remember to look back, and that helps you remind of, hey, I wasn't so great dealing with this back then. So maybe I cut this kid a little slack, and maybe I be the person that so-and-so was for me. And even though I didn't recognize it at the time, and maybe this kid won't recognize it at the time either, but maybe down the line they will, and that'll make the difference. You're right. That's a very positive way to look at this.
It's the most
spin on this book.
ambitious way to read this book.
I like that. That's very comforting. The idea of it paying off down the line, because you get a sense at the end, for a book about death and dealing with death as a child. What are the last lines? We're stronger than you think, or you're stronger than you think, which is very affirmation, very affirming. It's very positive, and you get a sense that Barbara, when she grows up, will be able to remember this and look back on this, and maybe not be exactly like Ms. Millay was to her, but can be that kind of rock, can be that steadying influence to someone else who's going through this,
Yeah.
Because she's going to take that lesson and will pay it forward. Going to pass on that message of you're stronger than you think, because I was there. I didn't think I was, and I found my strength. And if I can do it, that means you can. I like that kind of positive pay it forward messaging. Read this book. I like that conclusion. I'm going to go with that. Good call.
Beautiful. All right. Yeah. Well, we will see you next week for Day Tripper. And my gosh, the number of conclusions you'll be able to draw from that book are just an endless fountain. Not only is it the longest book that we've committed ourselves to this month, so
10 issues. 10 issues.
Extra time.
Yeah.
10 heavy
they're
issues.
Dense. They're heavy.
Like, I was gonna call them dense, and then I was like, but they're not like big words or tons of words.
Yeah. It isn't like Bendis dialogue, anything like that. But yeah, they're heavy. There's a lot to think about in each one, and it's meant to be that way. This is a book that because of its structure, and if you haven't read it, I don't want to spoil it now, but I don't want to say it's disserviced by a binge, because it's like you almost want to read one, stop and think about it a little bit, and then read the next issue, let it ruminate a little bit, and kind of formulate your thoughts. And it's one you may want to move a little slower through, because I think the book, I'm going to say, necessitates that. That's the wrong word. You don't have to do it that way, but I think it's equipped to do that. To give it a little more thought. So it'll be a headier conversation. I've said before multiple times, it is one of my all-time favorite books. It's like number 5 or 6 all-time, literally, like actual hardcore list of favorite books. It's one that I reread and return to all the time, whether it's I just jump back in and read a couple issues, read a spot issue, read the whole thing. It's one that always sticks with me. So it'll be a heavier one to get into, but one that I'm really, really looking forward to getting into and talking to you about, Mike.
Yeah, I had very mixed feelings when I tried to binge it. So this time I really am going to try to do 1-2 issues a day.
Yeah.
And jot some things down, finalize those thoughts, and then
move on
and read it again.
Yeah. If you have the time, I think this is a book that it can benefit from. Again, not necessary. I think it can benefit your reading experience, because I think it's Moon and Ba are asking you. They want you to think about this. They want you to ruminate on it. And so if you have the time and the ability, I'm going to try to do the same thing. Kind of read one, give it some time to let it settle a little bit before moving on. Because I think it can enrich the experience for this story, specifically in Day Tripper.
Beautiful. All right. Well, we will see you next week, next Thursday. Read Day Tripper. Find it in single issue, pace yourself, Hoopla, all the usual spots. You can find it, and you can find us, storydarks.com, Blue Sky, Instagram, and some other places.
We're out there. Yeah.
All right. See ya.
Peace.